Woman wakes up alone on a bench 500 miles from home. Shocked seeing a note in her hand, Betty's eyes fluttered open, and she shivered as she realized she was lying on a cold, hard bench. She sat up, trying to shake off the grogginess that clouded her thoughts. The world around her was still and quiet, and she couldn't see anyone else in the park. It was like a ghost town. She glanced down at herself, noticing that she was dressed in the same clothes she had worn the night before. She felt disoriented and confused, unable to remember how she had ended up in the park, let alone how far away she was from home. As she stood up, she noticed that her surroundings were unfamiliar, and she couldn't recognize any of the buildings or landmarks nearby. She felt a wave of fear and panic wash over her, wondering how she would get back home, or if she would even survive the night. Betty stumbled around the park, calling out for help, but no one answered. The park was eerily silent, and Betty felt like she was the only living soul in the world. Her phone was dead, and she had no way to contact anyone or find her way back home. Betty's mind raced with questions, and her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that she was completely alone, stranded in a place she didn't know. She felt helpless and lost, unsure of how she would survive the day, let alone find her way back home. She searched for any sign of life or civilization, but there was nothing. The buildings were empty, the streets were deserted, and the park was silent. She wondered if she had been drugged, kidnapped, or if she had lost her mind. As she sat down on the bench again, she noticed a small piece of paper sticking out from her pocket. She pulled it out, curious about what it could be. It was a note, folded neatly, with a message written in bold, black letters. "You are not alone. We are watching. Hey there, Viral Videos here. Before we go on like this video, smash the subscribe button and click the notification bell. We post the most beautiful, amazing and scary videos every single day. Let's proceed with the video." Betty felt her blood run cold, and her heart skipped a beat as she read the message. She had no idea who had left the note or why they were watching her. She wondered if they were the ones who had brought her to this place, or if they were simply taunting her. Betty sat there, clutching the note, feeling more alone and frightened than ever before. She knew she had to find a way out of this place, but she had no idea where to start. She wondered if she would ever see her family and friends again, or if she would be trapped in this nightmare forever. Betty stood up from the bench, her legs wobbling as she tried to steady herself. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart and her mind. She looked around the park, trying to find any clue that would give her a hint as to where she was or how she had ended up there. The park was unfamiliar, and Betty couldn't recognize any of the buildings or landmarks nearby. She realized that she was lost, alone, and a long way from home. She started to walk around the park, trying to find someone, anyone, who could help her. But there was no one. The streets were empty, the buildings were deserted, and the park was silent. Betty felt like she was in a ghost town, cut off from the rest of the world. She knew that she had to find a way back home, but she had no idea where to start. She reached into her pocket, hoping that her phone would be working now. But it was dead. Betty felt a wave of despair wash over her, realizing that she had no way to contact anyone or find her way back home. She had no idea how far away she was from home or how she could possibly get back. As she walked, she noticed that her clothes were rumpled and her shoes were scuffed. She wondered how long she had been lying on the bench, unconscious. She also noticed that her purse was missing, and with it, her identification and money. Betty felt vulnerable and exposed, like a fish out of water. She didn't know who had brought her here or why, but she knew that she had to get back home. She started to walk faster, trying to find a way out of the park. As she walked, Betty noticed a sign that said, "Welcome to Belford." She had never heard of Belford before, and she wondered how far away it was from her home. She realized that she was at least 500 miles from her home, and she had no idea how she had ended up so far away. Betty felt a pang of homesickness, thinking about her family and friends back home. She wondered if they were looking for her, if they knew that she was missing. She felt tears welling up in her eyes, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. Betty knew that she had to keep going, that she had to find a way back home. She started to walk down the street, hoping to find a bus station or a taxi stand. She had to get out of Belford, back to the safety and familiarity of her own home. Betty walked for what seemed like hours, but she could not find any mode of transportation. She was exhausted and her feet ached, but she could not afford to stop. She needed to find a way back home. As she walked, she stumbled upon a small coffee shop. The sign read, "The Roasted Bean." Betty entered the shop, hoping to find someone who could give her some information about Belford. As she walked towards the counter, Betty noticed a picture of herself hanging on the wall behind it. She gasped in shock and disbelief. It was a picture of her sleeping on the bench where she had woken up earlier that day. Betty was horrified. She had no idea how someone had taken that picture of her, and why it was hanging on the wall of the coffee shop. She felt violated and exposed. She wondered if she was being watched by someone or if this was just a cruel prank. Suddenly, a woman behind the counter caught her eye. The woman was looking at her intently, and she could sense that something was wrong. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman asked, concern etched on her face. Betty shook her head, unable to speak. The woman handed her a glass of water and sat her down at a nearby table. She waited patiently as Betty collected her thoughts. As Betty sipped the water, she noticed a piece of paper lying on the table. She picked it up, and to her surprise, it was a note addressed to her. The note read, "Betty, I know this must be confusing and scary for you. But please trust me when I say that you are safe. You are 500 miles away from home, and I know you must be feeling lost and alone. But I promise you that I will help you find your way back. Please come to the address written below, and I will explain everything." Betty felt a mix of relief and skepticism. She was relieved that someone was looking out for her, but she was also scared about what this could mean. Who had brought her to Belford, and why were they doing this to her? Betty looked up at the woman behind the counter. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked, showing her the note. The woman shook her head. "I'm sorry, dear. I have no idea what that is. But if you need anything, please let me know. We're here to help." Betty left the coffee shop, clutching the note in her hand. She was determined to find out who had brought her to Belford and why. She followed the address written on the note, hoping to find some answers. Betty sat on the train, staring out the window at the passing scenery. She had a long way to go before she reached Belford, but she was determined to find out more about her past. As she watched the world go by, her mind kept going back to the note she had found in her hand when she woke up on the bench. It was such a strange and mysterious thing, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than she realized. She pulled the note out of her pocket and examined it once again. The handwriting was neat and precise, and the words were carefully chosen. "Betty, you need to go to Belford. There, you will find the answers you seek." She didn't know who had written the note, but she felt a sense of urgency and purpose that she couldn't ignore. When she arrived in Belford, she walked the streets, trying to find any familiar landmarks or faces. It all seemed so foreign to her, and she felt more lost than ever. But then, she saw a small cafe on the corner, and something inside her told her to go inside. As she walked in, the smell of coffee and pastries filled her senses, and she felt a sense of comfort and familiarity. She walked up to the counter and ordered a coffee, and as she was waiting, she noticed a woman sitting in the corner. The woman was reading a book, but she kept glancing up at Betty, as if she recognized her. Betty felt a surge of hope. Could this woman be someone who knew her? She walked over to the woman's table and introduced herself. The woman smiled and said her name was Rachel. As they talked, Betty noticed that Rachel seemed to know more about her than she let on. She kept dropping hints and asking questions, but she never came right out and said anything. Finally, Betty couldn't take it anymore. "Rachel, do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice trembling. Rachel hesitated for a moment, as if considering her answer. "Betty, I can't say for sure. But I think I might have a clue. Betty's heart raced as Rachel explained that she had seen Betty in town a few weeks earlier, wandering around aimlessly. She had offered her a glass of water and tried to help her, but Betty had been too confused to give her any information. But then, Rachel had noticed something strange. Betty was wearing a bracelet with a name engraved on it, Emily. Rachel had asked Betty about the bracelet, but Betty had no memory of who Emily was or how she got the bracelet. Rachel had done some digging and found out that there was a car accident in the area around the same time that Betty had been found on the bench. A woman named Emily had been involved in the accident and had been taken to the hospital. Betty felt a jolt of recognition. Emily. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. Rachel continued, "I don't know for sure, Betty, but I think that maybe you were Emily. Maybe you suffered a head injury in the accident and lost your memory. Maybe that's why you ended up on that bench 500 miles from home." Betty sat there, stunned. It all seemed to make sense now. Emily. The name was like a missing puzzle piece that had finally clicked into place. She didn't know what the future held or where this would lead her, but she knew that she had a name, a clue, and a sense of purpose. She was no longer alone, and she was determined to find out who she really was. Betty spent the next few days following up on the lead that Rachel had given her. She went to the hospital and found out that Emily had indeed been in a car accident, but she had been released and sent home. With a newfound sense of determination, Betty decided to go to Emily's house and see if anyone there could give her more information. When she arrived, she was greeted by Emily's family, who were overjoyed to see her. They explained that Emily had been in a coma for several weeks after the accident and had lost all memory of her past. They had been searching for her ever since, but with no clues, it seemed like a hopeless task. But now, with Betty standing before them, they knew that their prayers had been answered. Betty sat down with Emily's family and talked for hours, piecing together the fragments of Emily's past. She learned that she had been a successful businesswoman, a loving wife, and a devoted mother. As she listened to their stories, she felt a sense of belonging and love that she had never experienced before. In the weeks that followed, Betty stayed with Emily's family, getting to know them and learning more about the woman she had once been. She realized that even though she couldn't remember her past, she had a bright future ahead of her, filled with love, family, and hope. And as she sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the horizon, she knew that she had finally found her way home. What did you think of this story? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video and subscribe. See you next time.